This is my Wheel of Time Season 3, Episode 3 review. Let's jump right in. This is Unraveling the Pattern. I'm Lauren. Check the description for a full spoiler warning. And let's talk about the good. As always, I'm just going to run through my list. So that opening sequence was so great to see. The Forsaken meeting. This happens in the books fairly often, but not until later in the books. And so it was really exciting to see a Forsaken meeting and that reveal of Lord Gabriel as Ravine. I'm glad that they didn't hold out on that they just revealed it, got that done. One of the things that I really liked is that Ravine was presented as a diplomat. Similar to how Elaine is a diplomat in earlier episodes, Ravine sort of was trying to ease and cause peace and ease contention between the other Forsaken. Samael and Lanfear clearly don't like each other, and I liked that dynamic a lot. But the fact that Ravine was like, guys, don't you remember the last time that we didn't get along and what happened? I actually like that. That was not just a nod to the Age of Legends, but potentially a nod to the story of the books. Like, don't you remember how we were always divided and we never worked together and how much of a problem that was for the story? So to me, that was really fun. Again, they're nailing the Forsaken, and I just love it. One thing that was also really cool, there was a special weave for the gateways that was very clear, which I also really loved. And then, of course, Moghedien hiding in the shadows and Ravine trying to be a diplomat to her. Moghedien's like, Lanfear called me a coward, and Ravine's like, yeah, but she called you smart too. I love that Ravine was just trying to smooth things over. Kind of a really cool concept for Ravine. Definitely better than his sort of mustache twirling version of himself in the book. So anyway, I'm really excited to see more of this. There's also this interesting dynamic between Moghedien and Ravine, like they might have some sort of romantic connection, which I find really fascinating. We got a mention of Nameless, which was really cool too, because it's great to hear terms from the books, and that was really exciting. Currently, apparently in the show, there is no Nameless. So does this mean Ishamael's still alive, or does this mean that, like Lanfear suspected, maybe the Dark One's just not ready yet to pick a new leader? Very interesting. I really liked the Black Aja scenes, the interrogation scenes. I thought that was all really well done. The way that Nynaeve and Elaine were recruited and called hounds, that was fun to hear. And the way that they tried different techniques with Joya and Amiko. They mentioned that they were stilled already, which is pretty interesting to me. I believe in the books, if I remember correctly, they had also been stilled, or maybe one of them had been stilled because of what happened with some of the shenanigans between the world of dreams and reality. But I guess one of the things that didn't really resonate for me is that they didn't act like they were stilled. I would have liked to actually see more of a reaction to being stilled. They did seem like they were miserable, but I actually really liked that moment when Amiko sort of made that turn and Nynaeve's like, cut the crap. And then Amiko's like, okay. And then she just kind of becomes more of her true self. I thought that was a really cool moment. I'm very intrigued about Elida. I love it when they take characters like Elida and give them more nuance. And what was the deal with her shaking? I thought that was really interesting. And then there was some mention of her bracelet. Min was like, is that bracelet part of a foretelling? And Elida was like, kinda. And I don't know what that was about exactly, but I'm intrigued. I went in and slowed it down, and there is a snake symbol on Elida's bracelet. And I don't know what that means. There's also, it looks like there's some sort of key on it. So that has my mind whirling about, snakes and foxes and keys and getting out and all of that. But I really have no clue what that's about. I wonder what do you think Elida's bracelet or shaking is about? Maybe it has nothing to do with the bracelet and she's just shaky. Maybe the foretelling kind of gives her almost like a sort of seizures or something. Anyway, I found that very interesting. What do you think is going on with Elida? In general, this episode was slower for me, but it also felt very important and necessary. So much politics going on in the tower, mentions of the Red Aja and sort of their hierarchy, the highest. Galena was mentioned. That was really cool. All of that stuff excited me because it's stuff from the books to a degree, obviously changed around a bit, and we're seeing things that happen behind the scenes in the books that weren't really at the forefront. But all of this politicking and intrigue going on with Elida, that stuff does fascinate me. I mean, it always excites me when we see things from the books and when we learn more about little nuanced things. For example, I really liked when the Aiel with Rand and Moraine and company came across the dead Tuatha'an, and they talked a little bit about the Shido. And my favorite element of all of that was Egwene's like, we need to bury these people. And Ruark was the one who stayed behind to bury them. Like, he truly has honor, and those Shido dogs have no honor. And I thought that whole sequence was really well done. Again, that was a lot of show, not tell, but it worked for me really well. Something that's not really in the books, but I liked, is the concept that Perrin's family always is buried with an apple seed, and that turns into an apple tree. I thought that was beautiful. Alana and her descriptions of grief and sort of sharing in that with Perrin, but also not exactly feeling grief the same way that Maxim does. I thought all of that was really well done, really interesting. It was a little bit on the slower side, and I'll talk more about some of my complaints with some of this stuff in the next section. But overall, that stuff emotionally resonated with me. A couple other things that excited me. Elida kind of helping Min. This Elida-Min team up kind of surprised me, but was exciting. This idea that they kind of share a similar burden of being able to foretell or see the future. They're both seers, as the show calls them. I liked that connection. And I like how Elida helped Min to understand that maybe her abilities or her ability to see is a gift and that she can take advantage of it in some way. I thought that was a nice little connection. Now, when Elida just openly shared her plans to cage the Dragon Reborn, obviously that's a red flag for Min, no pun intended, right? But all in all, I really like that connection. That's something that we didn't see any of that in the books, but it felt like a good idea for the show. I think my favorite elements of this episode were the Two Rivers folk. Just seeing Senbui mention Days Conger yelling at him. It felt like I had come home to a Thanksgiving dinner where not everyone got along, and it felt right to me. It was really fun. And I also loved Fail's introduction, or I know she was introduced earlier. I feel like they brought more out of Fail in this episode. And one of the things that is just really clear to me is that Perrin is huge compared to Fail. She really is like a little falcon, and I really like that. I think that the casting was excellent, and so far she's just knocked it out of the park as Fail. It'll be really interesting to see how that whole dynamic works in the future. It was really funny how Perrin reacted to her calling herself Mandarb. I thought that was all handled very well and enjoyable. Of course, seeing Perrin in the Forge was exciting. I was hoping for more of a scene where Perrin is in the Forge and Fail is watching from afar, and she's almost like falling for him while he's silently working in the Forge, kind of like what happens in book 3. Maybe we'll still get that, but I was kind of disappointed. Again, all these scenes, they just feel a little rushed. It's like, we need to have these moments with these characters, but we only have 2 minutes. Then we got to move on to the next thing. And I know, look, this is the Wheel of Time. There are thousands of characters. There are all these plot points. Despite all of this, they're still leaving so much out. They can't fit it all in. I understand that. So, as I always say, more episodes, more runtime, more budget, please. Other fun elements were the Galad, Gawain, Matt stuff. I'll talk more about that later. But I did just like how Galad kept kind of bursting in and trying to save women like he was some hero, and the women never wanted it. Min and Nynaeve were both like, I'm good, I'm fine. And he just butted in anyway to try to stop Matt trying to act the hero. That was just like a perfect representation of how I imagine these haughty princes of Andor. And finally, Kate Fleetwood is always a standout to me. Kate Fleetwood as Leandrin is the gift that keeps on giving. Do we need all of this extra backstory for her? Probably not, but it always works for me. And the whole thing of her grieving her dead son and all of that was really interesting to me. Was there too much of it? Probably. The whole like child bride thing in Tanchico, I'm still on the fence about all of that. That's pretty odd to me, but Kate Fleetwood is just a delight, and she just really is awesome whenever she's on screen. Another thing is the mystery girls, the girls getting together and like solving mysteries and figuring out what's going on. That really excited me. And seeing those Easter eggs of the different ter'angreal, seeing the twisted stone ring, not just the picture of it, but the actual ter'angreal itself, all of that really excited me. So now that I've rambled about all the good things and just run through my list, let's get into the bad and the confusing. I already kind of mentioned this, but Amiko and Joya being stilled, I guess I would have liked to see more of the effects of that on them. It just didn't feel like it was very weighty. It didn't feel like it had any weight to it. And so I would have liked to see more of that. As always, my bad and confusing things are most often just tiny little nitpicks because I feel the need to review and I don't even really dislike a lot. But I will say of the first 3 episodes, this was my least favorite. It was the slowest. The funny thing is, when I first watched this episode, I wrote in my notes, this was so weird. The pacing was off. Everything felt rushed. And then when I watched it my second time, everything felt super slow. And I was like, when are they going to get to anything? It was kind of funny how it all just depends on when you're watching and your perspective and how much you're paying attention. I will say the pacing on my second watch was much better. It didn't feel nearly weirdly paced as I originally thought when I first watched it, but it also did feel a little bit slow to me. And I already kind of mentioned this, but I feel like all of this was necessary. It was important. Could they have cut back on some of the subplot things with Maxim and Alana or with Leandrin and her backstory? Yes. But I feel like I know what they're doing. I understand what they're doing. But I don't know. In general, it felt like this was not a filler episode, but like they had to get from point A to point B for later episodes. And so they had to just kind of give us some of that exposition and fill in some of the story elements that needed to happen in this episode. So it just felt a little bit slower to me. Speaking of specific nitpicks, this episode had a lot of people talking about very secret private things in public areas and spaces. And that was kind of funny to me. That's just kind of like a silly TV trope that I don't love, but I noticed it quite a bit. You have Lyanna and Varen talking and Elaine overhearing, and then later you have like Elida talking with people in the hall and other places, or not in the hall, but in the halls. It all just felt a little silly to me. The one moment where it worked for me was when Matt and Nynaeve at the end were talking about Leandrin going to Tanchico and Galad and Gawain kind of overhearing that. And the reason why I felt that was important is because that actually fits in with the books where Galad and Gawain are trying to figure out where their sister went. And so that worked for me. But I don't know, there was just a lot of that kind of trope in this episode that kind of got old for me. I liked the Gray Man attack, but I didn't like that Sheriam wasn't involved. I'm okay that Varen was involved, and I thought there were certain elements about the Gray Man attack, but I'm still kind of scratching my head about this because in the show, supposedly, Gray Men can only be created by Moghedien, which means that when a Gray Man tries to assassinate someone, it's sent by Moghedien, right? So why did Moghedien want to kill Elaine and Nynaeve specifically? I'm not totally sold on that yet. That being said, they were in the Brown Aja quarters and maybe even in Varen's study, so maybe the Gray Man was sent for Varen. I did like how once the Gray Man was killed, they were like, that wasn't us. Somebody stabbed it. And the way that Varen sort of showed up and was mysterious, I liked that. That happens with Sheriam in the books, and I like that kind of change. But all in all, that kind of confused me a little bit, which is why I put it in this section. It felt like they were trying to do the scene from the books, but didn't have the exact same motivations. And it was a little unclear to me. Maybe that stuff will get resolved later. I've already sort of talked about this, but the Leandrin backstory stuff, I find it interesting. I don't know that it's necessary. I do find it really intriguing to think about like child brides and how that affects someone and how Leandrin was affected by all of that. I'm still hopeful that we'll get some sort of flashback with Leandrin. There were some hints of that with some of the promotional materials. So my hope is that we'll get some sort of filler or not filler, but stuff that will fill in that concept a little bit more. On the other hand, I'm always a little concerned when they spend too much time on characters like Maxim or Leandrin and not as much time on Perrin or the people of the Two Rivers. For example, I would have really loved to see in this episode Trollocs and a little raiding party, maybe Perrin going out with some people of the Two Rivers and fighting some Trollocs out in the woods or something like we see in the books. Maybe we'll still get that in the future, but it's those kinds of things where it's like, you have to sacrifice those things from the books in order to do these other things that you're trying to do. And I get why you're doing it, but I've rambled enough about that. You understand. I am really intrigued by Naomi and her sort of like compulsion / brainwashing weave that she uses. I'm hopeful that we'll learn more about that. But again, was it necessary? What she did to that child bride, I understand that it's almost seen as merciful, but I've already kind of talked about this, but I don't love the idea that Lanfear and Rand are meeting consensually in the dream. That makes me really uncomfortable. Lanfear, she's Lanfear. She's going to do that kind of thing. But Rand being okay with it, that's skeevy to me. And I'm not sure how I feel about it, especially considering that Lanfear is taunting and torturing Egwene at the same time. Now, obviously, Rand doesn't know that, but he knows something's up, and we'll see where that goes, but that makes me uncomfortable. I'd say my biggest complaint from this episode and from the show so far is, are we going to see Lucky Matt? Where is Lucky Matt? I wanted to see Matt running through the streets of Tar Valon on a luck spree while being chased by a Gray Man. They even had this sort of like red herring moment where he was out in the streets with the girls as they were headed to a boat to go to Tanchico, and there was someone in a hood, and it was like, who's it going to be? And then like 5 seconds later, they revealed it was Min following them. And I was just kind of disappointed because I was really hopeful that we would get that book plot where Matt would stay behind, the girls would go, and then he would overhear Lord Gabriel talking about having them killed, and then he would find Tom in the streets, and together the two of them would go to Tanchico to save the girls. I guess I was really hoping for that. It's just one of those things where compressed timelines that need to get people to different places so that they can get onto the Tanchico storyline. It just felt very apparent to me. And that was probably my biggest disappointment from this episode is, when are we going to see Lucky Matt? Is Matt lucky? That hasn't even been made clear. And I really hope that we get a moment where that's made clear. So I guess we'll see. Okay, enough nitpicking about tiny little things. As you can see, almost always my bad and ugly or confusing things are just things I'm hopeful that we'll get from the books that don't quite go the way I was expecting. These things are probably coming and I shouldn't be worried about it, but this is the nature of my reviews. They're just kind of me rambling. Okay, let's move on to the great and the surprising. I mean, the Forsaken meeting, that's awesome. So great to see that. Information about the dream world. As slow as this episode felt to me, it had so much exposition. Maybe that's why it felt slow. It had so many new terms. There was all kinds of stuff. And to me, it didn't feel heavy-handed. It worked. But there was just a lot of new stuff. We learned a lot more about Teleron Riyadh. We learned about the idea that if you get hurt in the dream world, you can have those wounds on the outside. That's why Egwene has these bruises. There was all kinds of stuff that was mentioned in this episode that I think is important. Something that really shocked me, even though we knew that they were changing the backstory for Melindra's character, I'd say one of the standout things from this episode for me was Melindra being of Malchieri descent and her telling Lan that she would break her spears and follow him immediately if he became the king to go and try to reclaim Malchier. That really resonated with me. I thought that was really well done, and it gave me chills. That's just something I didn't think the show would spend much time on, and the fact that they did got me really excited. To me, that's a brilliant adaptation change, taking someone like a pretty minor character like Melindra and giving her a little bit more connection to someone like Lan. It's just a really smart idea to keep things moving. For Perrin's storyline, Fail calling herself Mandarb and all of that, definitely a highlight. But I have to say, for me, the most exciting thing in this episode was Min's vision of Mat hanging. Now, you're going to be like, what? Mat hanging? That's not cool. But if you're a book reader, you know why that's exciting. We saw the redstone doorframe behind him. We saw him being hanged. That is very exciting to me. If they show us that and somehow change it and don't have him properly going through the redstone door frames, and they are just teasing us with this vision, like someone else just hangs him and the redstone doorframe happens to be there, that would be, I mean, just so cruel. I can't imagine they would do that. So I'm really, really hopeful that this means we are getting the snakes and foxes, or at least a variation of that, because I just need it to happen. And then, of course, I mean, iconic scene, different from the books, but I thought very well done. Mat and Galad and Gawain fighting, Mat with the quarterstaff. I think the most satisfying moments of all of that were actually Nynaeve's reactions, where she went from Mat, don't do this, to, oh, Mat knows what he's doing, to like, haha, that sort of smug look on her face when he beat them. That to me was just an excellent scene. And even though it was different from the books, I'm actually glad it didn't happen in the previous episode in public with everyone else watching. I think it was more important for Mat's character to do this in that setting. It seemed a little bit more humble. I don't know. Just in general, I liked that better. And then, of course, the reveal that Moghedien is sneaking around from the shadows watching the Black Aja was also a very exciting thing to me. So anyway, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching my rambling reviews. Please watch my other videos, which are better than these. And yeah, like the video, subscribe to Unraveling the Pattern. Please consider supporting me on Patreon or YouTube like these awesome people. And until next time, let the dragon ride again on the winds of Prime.